tell you that charity was bad, you would probably think I was insane. That's exactly what I thought last year when my sociology professor told my class the same thing. I used to think that any type of volunteer work or donations could only make a positive impact, but this is not true. In this speech, I will inform you about the problem of poverty, how traditional approaches to charity can often be harmful, and what we can do to change that. I hope to convince you that people and organizations should be cautious about how they volunteer and provide aid. Though I'm sure we all know some facts and statistics about poverty, I'd like to provide you with some solid information to further your comprehension of the extent of this problem. According to the article, Poverty in the United States by Bill Fay, written in 2017, poverty is defined as the human condition of being unable to provide a standard level of food, water, or shelter. The World Bank defines absolute extreme poverty as living on less than $1.25 a day. And relative poverty is based on income inequality. Therefore, someone who's considered poor in Europe could be living a different lifestyle than someone who's considered poor in America. In America, there are about 45 million people considered in extreme poverty. This is 13% of the population. The causes and side effects of poverty make an endless and perpetuating cycle and can be summarized into 4 groups. These are unemployment, education, health, and crime. Unemployment blocks opportunities for upward mobility. Even if someone is hireable, they may not have access to transportation or appropriate work attire to maintain a job. Lack of education inhibits self-improvement and growth. The cycle of poverty often starts when children don't have access to adequate education. And even if they do, the stress of growing up in poverty often gives them an unearned disadvantage. It's not a coincidence that poor health is heavily correlated with communities of lower income. The inability to obtain inadequate health services or nutritious food makes it harder for people to go to work and provide for themselves. As far as crime goes, it's difficult for people growing up around this violence in type of lifestyle to detach themselves. There are many social connections and stereotypes connected between poverty and crime that are self-perpetuating. These problems are inherent in society and difficult to solve. While charity seems like the obvious solution, the traditional idea of it is often harmful. You may be wondering how charity could possibly be this way. However, if aid is not implemented well, it can in fact have a negative result. In the article, Arguments Against Charity, written by BBC in 2014, many organizations target symptoms of an issue, not the cause. This is known as the Band-Aid effect. Traditional charity often accepts social injustices and just deals with their consequences. For real change to occur, embedded social problems must be addressed. One example of a root problem not being addressed occurred in Cambodia. Ian Barrow wrote about this in The Guardian in 2010. During the 1990s, the number of orphanages in Cambodia rose dramatically. Since at their root, orphanages are businesses, they benefit from profit, and they capitalize off the guilt and concerns of Westerners. Rather than raising money for families to care for their children, money was donated to orphanages, which simply increased the number of orphans. Because only the symptoms of families not being able to care for their children was attended to, the problem grew. Another way charity can fail is if they do not adhere to the needs of a community. In the article, How to Make Sure Charity Doesn't Keep People Poor, written in The Federalist in 2016, the process of providing aid often happens in 3 steps. These are relief, rehabilitation, and development. Relief is the immediate delivery of emergency supplies to reduce suffering. Rehabilitation is the process of getting everything back to a state of normalcy. Development is making sure an entire community is a better place. Development is a partnership between those in need and those providing aid. This is where the needs of the specific community should dictate how development continues. A good example of this process occurred during Hurricane Matthew. During relief, food, water, and temporary shelter was provided. During rehabilitation, houses and roads were repaired. And during development, banks helped local organizations create jobs and restore businesses in the community. However, sometimes this process is done incorrectly. In the article, How Charity Makes Life Worse for Africans, written in The Telegraph in 2012, there's a study done in Ethiopia on the improvement of water supplies in rural areas, which was funded by charity organizations. This led to a chain reaction of negative consequences. First, there's an increased population. and therefore there was a strain on food supplies. Next, people were forced to move to cities where they found themselves in poverty. This is an example of what happens when the specific needs of a community are not properly addressed. This organization did not prepare for the unforeseen consequences of international development and aid. While the intent behind volunteering is noble, it is often approached incorrectly. In the article, The Subtle Problems of Charity, written in The Atlantic by James Adams, there is a social division between philanthropists and those in need. This is because the upper class often patronizes the poor. Matthew Jenkin wrote in 2015 in The Guardian that well-meaning yet inexperienced volunteers can often do more harm than good. Agencies that send volunteers abroad are often driven by profit. Therefore, they work to meet the demands of the volunteers and not necessarily those in need. We must ask who is benefiting, the volunteer or the community. Volunteers often show up, do work for a day or two, and then leave. There's no follow-through to make sure that what they did made a positive impact. These problems with charities and volunteering can be solved through awareness and understanding. Organizations and anyone looking to make a difference should be attentive and considerate to creating positive change. Peter Singer wrote in the New York Times in 2013 that the best way to pick a good cause to support is to do research. People should find the most meaningful and effective way to donate. You should know where your money is going and be able to follow up on the impact being made. David Bass wrote in the article, Why Work is the Best Charity for the Poor, in 2015, that many organizations offer short-term help and perpetuate the problem. For example, the government offers food stamps and checks, and many charity organizations offer a hot meal or shelter. This simply makes people dependent on others, which is not a permanent solution. What people really need is to re-enter society. Because it is difficult to return to normalcy, effective charities help with this adjustment and resettlement. Robert Frank wrote in the Wall Street Journal in 2010 that society would benefit more if organizations channeled their energies and resources towards building jobs and helping those in poverty provide for themselves rather than providing them with temporary goods. There's a well-known quote that says, give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. The solution to poverty is not a hot meal or shelter for one day. The solution is independence and the ability to be able to provide for yourself. Organizations and everyday citizens should be aware of this distinction. If we want real change to occur, we must be able to go the extra mile. So next time you volunteer or donate money, I challenge you to follow up on that effort and see what kind of impact you are making.